All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we aren't just looking at modern bar recipes or mixology techniques. We're actually traveling way back in time. We're going to explore how something we take totally for granted today was actually one of humanity's earliest scientific achievements, and how it laid the very foundations for agriculture, trade, and the way we gather together.
Here's our roadmap for today. First, the happy accident that kicked it all off. Then, the science of yeast. After that, we'll hit early China and Mesopotamia, followed by the drinking cultures of Egypt, Greece, and Rome. And finally, we'll wrap up with the modern legacy.
So, Part 1. The happy accident. Humanity's earliest discovery.
You know, when we look back at history, we always want to know who gets the credit, right? Like, who was the brilliant inventor who first whipped up a batch of alcohol? Was it some lone genius in a specific ancient empire?
Well, plot twist, it wasn't a who at all. It was actually a complete natural biological accident. Picture this. Early hunter-gatherers are just wandering through the forest. They spot some fallen fruit that's been baking in the warm sun, exposed to wild yeast floating in the air. The yeast munches on those natural sugars, creates alcohol, and boom! Humans probably watched animals acting, well, a little weird after eating those fruits and thought, hey, let's give that a try.
Moving right along to Part 2, the science of yeast, nature's own microbrewery.
What's really crazy here is that ancient folks managed to harness one of humanity's greatest scientific achievements without even knowing what a microorganism was. They learned to control a process they couldn't even see. The magic behind all of this is fermentation. Basically, living yeast cells feast on simple sugars for energy, and when they do, they leave behind two huge byproducts: ethanol, which is the alcohol part, and carbon dioxide. Essentially, without these invisible microscopic little guys, the entire global beverage industry literally wouldn't exist.
It all boils down to an incredibly elegant universal equation provided by nature. First, you need a sugar source. Grapes give you wine, barley gives you beer, apples turn into cider, rice becomes sake, and honey becomes mead. You get the idea. Next, you introduce the yeast. And finally, you just let the yeast do the heavy lifting to produce that ethanol and CO2. It's the exact same basic biological sequence every single time.
All right, Part 3, early China and Mesopotamia, where intentional cultivation really kicks off.
So, when did humans start doing this on purpose? Well, archaeologists actually found pottery jars in ancient China dating all the way back to 7000 BCE, containing chemical residues of fermented rice, honey, and fruit used for ceremonial purposes. Then, around 6000 BCE, early wine production pops up in the Caucasus region. Fast forward a bit, and the Sumerians in Mesopotamia are literally building entire agricultural systems just to cultivate barley specifically for beer. They weren't just stumbling upon it anymore, they were engineering it.
And in Mesopotamia, beer was an absolute necessity for safe hydration. Back then, untreated water was often full of harmful bacteria, so the fermentation process actually made beer much safer to drink. Plus, it gave them essential calories. It was so crucial to their daily survival and economy that King Hammurabi included strict rules for tavern operations and fair pricing in his famous legal code. Yeah, we're talking about the world's absolute oldest hospitality laws. Turns out, running a fair, safe bar has been a priority for literally thousands of years.
Which brings us to Part 4, Egypt, Greece, and Rome, looking at culture and law.
There is a massive cultural contrast in the ancient world here. In ancient Egypt, beer was a daily dietary staple. Think of it like liquid bread. They even gave it out as a daily nutritional ration to the laborers physically building the pyramids to give them energy and safe hydration. But over in ancient Greece, totally different vibe. They elevated wine to this intellectual catalyst. It was for symposia, these highly civilized gatherings where drinking accompanied music, poetry, and philosophy.
But the Greeks had very strict rules about this. To them, drinking undiluted wine was completely inappropriate, just totally uncivilized. They deeply valued moderation and deliberately watered down their wine to ensure that those deep philosophical conversations stayed sharp and didn't just evolve into total chaos. Honestly, this insistence on moderation is pretty much the earliest foundation for what modern bartenders now call responsible alcohol service.
Then, the Romans come along, inherit those traditions from the Greeks, and just scale them up to a massive industrial level. As the Roman Empire expanded, they didn't just conquer territories, they literally planted vineyards across regions like France, Spain, and Germany, places that are world famous for wine today. And to support their traveling soldiers and merchants, they built these vast networks of taverns and inns.
They basically created the direct blueprints for our modern hotels and bars.
And finally, part 5, the modern legacy, from history to hospitality. So why does all of this matter to us today? Well, when a modern bartender serves a drink, they aren't just mixing a recipe. They're actively continuing a profound cultural tradition. Every single bottle of wine, beer, or spirit is the culmination of 9,000 years of agriculture, trade, science, and human connection. From the nutritional needs of the pyramid builders, to the Greek philosophers, to the Mesopotamian tavern keepers, today's hospitality pros are the custodians of this massive cultural heritage. They aren't just pouring a beverage, they're storytellers.
So I'm going to leave you with this provocative thought to ponder. How does knowing about this completely accidental 9,000-year-old origin change the way you view your next glass? The next time you're sitting at a cafe, a pub, or a restaurant, just take a second to realize you're participating in one of humanity's oldest continuous traditions. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, stay curious, and I'll catch you in the next one.